Welcome all to another episode of After School. I'm Randall Carlson, and for many years I have been researching the ancient origins of many of our modern customs, holidays, and celebrations. One that has particularly intrigued me is the origin and observance of Halloween. Join me as we explore the profound and mysterious celebration that has roots in an ancient, universal tradition of catastrophe that caused a true global reset. So, without further ado, let's take a dive down this primordial rabbit hole. The ancient knowledge will again abound and overflow as water upon the earth. The remains of this knowledge are everywhere about us in everyday use and perfect. This is a quote from a book, one of the early books I ever read on the subject of Kabbalah and geometry and mystery religions. It was entitled The Source of Measure, written in 1875 by J. Ralston Skinner. And I think I read this book over 50 years ago, and this particular quote really stuck with me for multiple reasons. So as we go through this material, we may come back and revisit this quote and see more in it than we're seeing upon the initial reading. Old English proverb, fire and water have no mercy. And of course, we know from myths and legends from all around the planet that there were two primary ways that the world was periodically destroyed, and it involved flood and fire. In the Greek terminology, flood was cataclysmos, from where we get the word cataclysm, and the destruction of the world by fire was ekparousis, the root of that term being pyro, meaning fire. And in some versions of it, the periodic destructions of the world alternated between one of fire and one of flood. We know that looking at the actual record, the geological record, the biological record, other proxy records of past changes, that there have been times when both fire and flood were involved almost simultaneously. I cite as an example the Younger Dryas boundary, the lower Younger Dryas boundary, that has preserves evidence of gigantic floods and also evidence of gigantic fires. So from the Arthurian tradition, we find this quote from Merlin, the magician: "It is the doom of men that they forget." And so there are certain traditions that have been handed down, certain customs, certain ceremonies, certain observations that we take for granted that actually conceal a much deeper meaning than what is assumed in a typical secular context. So in this particular case, as an example, we'll look at Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, and we'll consider some of its origin stories. Now, before we do that, I'm going to give a quote from the popular press that refers to Halloween and I think completely misses the reality of it. Lessons from the Great Pumpkin. Great Pumpkin, of course, was from the Charlie Brown comic strip. And Linus, one of the characters in the Charlie Brown comic strip, believed that there was a great pumpkin similar to the Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, and this was an ongoing theme in many of the Charlie Brown or Peanuts classic comics. So this is from 2010 in the Parade, the Sunday magazine that was sent out with lots of Sunday newspapers back in the day when people were still mostly reading newspapers. It's called Lessons from the Great Pumpkin. The true genius of the Great Pumpkin may be the way it sends up other holiday parables by having a character seek deeper meaning in the sole holiday that has no real lesson to teach. Is there any other day we celebrate that is as empty of moral or historical significance? Halloween exists today simply so that kids can dress up, run around after dark, eat too much candy, and scare the pants off one another. So that's all there is to Halloween, at least according to popular conceptions. All right. On Halloween, when the festival of the dead commenced, quote, the spirits of the dead wander more than at any other time of the year. This is a night when devils, witches, and other mischief-making beings are all abroad on their baleful midnight errands. This is a 19th century commentary on Halloween. And this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1963 edition. I like to go back to some of the older encyclopedias sometime because they're not so politically correct. In its strictly religious aspect, this occasion is known as the Vigil of Hallowmass or All Saints' Day. November 1st, observed by the Roman Catholic and Anglican churches. In Great Britain, Ireland, and the United States, ancient Halloween folk customs persist alongside the ecclesiastical observance. The occasion shows clear connections with the religion of the Druids in pre-Christian Ireland and Scotland. The Celtic year ended on October 31st, the eve of Samhain, and was celebrated with both religious and agrarian rites. For the Druids, Samhain was both the end of summer and a festival of the dead. The spirits of the dead were believed to visit their kinsmen in search of warmth and good cheer as winter approached. It was also an occasion when fairies, witches, and goblins terrified the populace. Bonfires were lighted on hilltops on the eve of Samhain. The tendency to manipulate rather than to celebrate folk festivals such as Halloween is characteristic of the 20th century. It reflects the growing influence of a rational outlook on life and the loss of interest in imagination and fantasy. The secular character of contemporary culture is also reflected in public neglect of the religious significance of Halloween, as well as in progressive loss of its folk vitality. Children are least affected by this disenchantment, and consequently, the more important folk occasions tend to be dominated by the young. Now, this quote kind of was a foretaste of this growing influence of the rational outlook on life that we saw expressed through the previous quote, that essentially denied to Halloween any significance at all. And yet here it is. Anyone who takes even the most cursory look at it realizes that it has this connection with the 3-day religious festival of All Hallows Eve, All Saints, and All Souls Day. So let's go on here. Here's another old tradition. This is quoted from the History of Halloween that was on the History Channel maybe a decade ago or so. If you put your clothes on inside out and walk backwards on Halloween night, you will see a witch flying in the sky at midnight. People used to believe that witches were the devil. The Day of the Dead, a universal tradition. This is from the work of Robert Grant Halliburton, who was an interesting person, a scholar, a poet. Oh, what were his attainments? He was a researcher and wrote quite a bit. But anyways, let's see, this is what Wikipedia says about him. He was a Canadian lawyer and an anthropologist. He became famous after founding the Canada First organization that saw English Canadian society as the heirs of Aryan Northmen. So he was a bit of a racist, but that was normal back in those days. But he was a very extensive author who wrote numerous pamphlets, books. He gave addresses and papers in a variety of subjects. So anyways, we're going to be looking at one of the things that he did. This is from The New Materials for the History of Man, number 1, The Festival of the Dead, was published in 1868. So having had rather unexpectedly to visit England in 1859, I thought it advisable to prepare a brief paper for the Society of Antiquaries of London, and accordingly selected customs connected with All Souls' Day as a subject. On outlining it in England, it was apparent that the coincidences in the observance of this festival by different nations were much more striking than I had supposed. A new and most startling fact was discovered when I came to read over the paper I had prepared. It was singular that the Festival of the Dead amongst the ancient Peruvians was celebrated on the same day as by the Spaniards, that is, on All Souls' Day, November 2nd. I had also considered this merely as a curious coincidence, but it was apparent on reading over the results of my investigations that the festival was generally observed in November south as well as north of the equator, a fact so remarkable that it was evident that whatever could be the cause, it must be something hitherto unknown. So, from 1859 until the present year, so this is 9 years later, all the leisure that could be spared from public and private engagements has been devoted to the inquiry. It was evident that the uniformity could not have been caused or been preserved by any calendar now known to us, and that the festival must originally have been regulated by some visible sign or mark that nature had supplied to our ancestors and the Peruvians. In European calendars, the last day of October and the first and second days of November are designated as the festivals of All Halloween, All Saints, and All Souls. Though they have hitherto never attracted any special attention, and have not been supposed to have been connected with each other, they originally constituted but one commemoration of 3 days' duration, known amongst all nations as the Festival of the Dead or the Feast of the Ancestors. It is now, or was formerly, observed at or near the beginning of November by the Peruvians, the Hindus, the Pacific Islanders, the people of the Tonga Islands, the Australians, the ancient Peruvians, the ancient Egyptians, the northern nations of Europe, and continued for 3 days among the Japanese, the Hindus, the Australians, the ancient Romans, and the ancient Egyptians. The startling fact that this feast was celebrated among the ancient Peruvians at the same period and on the same day that Christians solemnize the commemoration of the dead, at once drew my attention to the question: how was this uniformity in the time of observance preserved, not only in far distant quarters of the globe, but also through that vast lapse of time since the Indo-European first inherited this primeval festival from a common source? In the most ancient calendar in India, the year commenced in the month of November, which bears the name Kartigui, which means the Pleiades, a constellation which must, by its rising or setting at that time, once have regulated the primitive year. We find also that in the month of October, the Hindus, like ourselves, have 3 days which are connected with the Festival of the Dead. In the ancient Egyptian calendar, the same resemblance can be traced between the name of the Pleiades, which among the Hebrews and Chaldeans is Athorai, with that of the Egyptian month of November, which is Athor. The Arab name for the Pleiades, Ataria, also suggests a resemblance. And I will suggest here that these names for the Pleiades, which I think you're seeing now, Athorai, the Hebrews and the Chaldeans, Athor, Egyptian, and Ataria, Arabic. Now, if you look at the word Ataria here, what do you see here? Taur. Does that suggest anything? Does it? Yes, very good. Excellent. You get an attaboy for that. Halliburton goes on. Let us turn from the islands of the Pacific to Peru, and there we find the primitive calendar of 2 seasons marked by a New Year's festival of the dead occurring in November and celebrated at precisely the same time as in Europe and in Polynesia. The event in which it occurs, says Rivero, quotes, is called Ayamark, from Aya, a corpse, and Marca, carrying in arms, because they celebrated the solemn festival of the dead with tears, lugubrious songs, and plaintive music. It is worthy of remark that the feast was celebrated among the ancient Peruvians at the same period and on the same day that Christians solemnize the commemoration of the dead. Is it not somewhat startling to find that Australian savages at or near the time of Halloween, All Saints, and All Souls also consecrate 3 days to the memory of the dead as a vernal New Year's celebration regulated by the time-honored Pleiades? And like the Northern Festival of the Dead beginning in the evening, or with a Halloween, in the Tonga Islands, which belong to the Fiji group, the festival of Anachi, a vernal first fruits celebration, and also a commemoration of the dead, takes place towards the end of October and commences at sunset. So here is a compilation of some of the partial list of ancient cultures observing a festival of the dead in late October, November. And you can see this down the left is the column of some of the, and this is not all inclusive either. But you'll be able to go over this on your own time and look at this. And here we go, another very important connection in all of this. A remarkable fact, however, was incidentally forced upon my attention, that the memory of the deluge was by the Mexicans, the Egyptians, and the Jews associated with the same time of the year and by the 2 latter nations as well as in Greece. And with that day I had found some very peculiar superstitions connected in the Pacific Islands as well as among most ancient nations. Among the Aztecs as well as the Egyptians, the deluge was commemorated at the beginning of the year of the Pleiades, when that constellation culminated at midnight. Now this is a very interesting connection, which brings us right back to something that the study of which I've been involved with for decades. And this is the myths and legends of the world-destroying floods, the cataclysmos of the ancient Greeks, the Noahide flood of the ancient Hebrews, the Christians and the Muslims. And so now here we have some interesting connections. That the flood is celebrated as having occurred at this time of year. The universal ancient tradition, the Day of the Dead, celebrated at this time of year. As Halliburton points out, there must have been some commonality amongst this, something to bring this coincidence in time together around some event, which he assumed was a natural event, and then he learned that the Pleiades rises and culminates at midnight. It rises essentially at sundown in late October, early November, and by midnight it's culminating. It's crossing the local meridian. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, if you're facing due south, you would look directly above, depending on how high would be, depending on your latitude. But let's say at 45 degrees up, where the plane of the ecliptic is, we see the constellation of the Pleiades, which traditionally is placed at the shoulder of the bull, the shoulder of Taurus, the bull. And I think that this is going back even to the days of the Egyptians. We know that Taurus the bull was a recognized, defined constellation as long as 16,000 years ago, because we see it depicted on the cave paintings, with the Pleiades very distinctly shown as a cluster of stars. We now turn to Mexico, and there we find that the great festival of the Mexican cycle was held on the 17th of November and was regulated by the Pleiades. It began at sunset, and at midnight, as that constellation approached the zenith, a human victim was offered up to avert the dread calamity which they believed impended over the human race. This belief was so remarkable that I cannot omit a reference to it here. They had a tradition that at that time the world had been previously destroyed, and they dreaded lest a similar catastrophe would, at the end of a cycle, annihilate the human race. Greswell has devoted several chapters and much learning to the 17th day of November to show how remarkable a landmark it has always been through a long lapse of centuries. Even among the Persians, the same day was peculiarly venerated. In the ancient Persian calendar, the 17th day of November was held so sacred that all favors asked of rulers were granted on that day. So now we have this second date that's kind of get thrown into the mix, which initially might seem to complicate things, but once we begin to dive deeper into the details, we'll begin to understand exactly why we have this thing associated with October 31st, November 1st, and the significance of November 17th. Even tradition has been unable to preserve the history of this day that must be sought for in the very earliest ages of the world. In the mysteries of Isis, the goddess of agriculture and of death, the funereal part of the ceremonies, the lamentations and search for Osiris, which commenced on the 17th and ended on the 19th. Among the Greeks, besides existing in other ceremonies, the primeval festival of the dead appears under a veil of mythology in all the ancient mysteries, but above all, in the greatest of them, the Eleusinian. But now, I'm going to show you something where I think you'll begin to see the interconnections here. So I want to call your attention first to the Taurids, which is the name of the meteor stream. Its cometary source, Comet Encke, and it peaks twice, once in late June and again in early November. Peaks from November 1st to November 3rd, approximately. And the radiant point of the Taurids is very near Pleiades in the shoulder of the bull. In fact, it's almost like a bullseye on the Pleiades. And so we have this correlation between one of the great meteor streams that has existed over thousands of years and a yearly festival that was part of both recognition of the ancestors and the Day of the Dead. And it's part of this constellation of the bull. Also, I want you to look just below the Taurids, and you'll see the Leonids. So there you've got the bull and you've got the lion, two of the creatures depicted, one half of the four creatures that represent the apocalypse, shown on tympanums of cathedrals, shown in many different forms, many different places as the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. But notice the Leonids, cometary source, temple, Tuttle, and you notice the date that they peak. So we have two of the great meteor streams peaking, each with these two dates. I think this is significant. So in the Great Pyramid, its Secrets and Mysteries Revealed by Piazza Smythe, written in 1880, we find this. Now hereupon we may all well wonder how it came about that, according to the invaluable researches of Mr. Robert G. Halliburton of Halifax, Nova Scotia, that amongst the origins of almost all nations, and among many unaltered savage tribes still, such as the Australians, Fijians, Mexicans, and many others, people never reached by the Greeks or Romans. A similar beginning of the year to that described by Virgil is still perpetuated. The Pleiades, or the star group, chiefly characterizing for those nations the constellation of Taurus, being annually appealed to for that purpose. And I have a quote here from Virgil. Let me just jump back to that. If I pronounce this anywhere near the correct pronunciation, Candidatus oratus apparet cum cornibus unum Taurus. The constellation of the white bull with the golden horns, which opens the year. And here we have the Pleiades. And in the next slide, we have a traditional depiction of Taurus the bull with the Pleiades occupying the shoulder of the bull. And here's an example of Taurus the bull with the Pleiades, not quite on the shoulder, but this painting has been dated to 14,500 BC, which is basically 16,500 years ago. Now, how remarkable is it when you think about it that, at least in this one case, the same constellation has, in the same depiction of that constellation as a bull, has existed or persisted for that long. And then we will begin to find lots of bull symbolism. And here we are facing south at approximately midnight from the eastern United States over the evening of Halloween, October 31st, November 1st. We're facing due south, and look what you've got right there, standing right on the local meridian, is the Pleiades, the shoulder of the bull, which has risen at sunset from the east, culminates at midnight, and then sets in the west. And here you can see spring equinox. This is spring equinox on April 9th, 2300 BC. So 4,300 years ago. At the end of the age of Taurus, around the time of the Bronze Age collapse, this is what was going on in the sky. The spring equinox was transiting the Pleiades, the shoulder of the bull. Here's another depiction of the midnight sky on Halloween. Facing south from mid-latitudes, green line is local meridian. So sometime right around midnight, the Pleiades, moving from left to right, will transit the local meridian. Stansbury Hagar in 1931, he was an astronomer who was very interested in ancient traditions, ancient astronomical traditions. In the journal Popular Astronomy for August and September of 1931, he wrote an article called November Meteors in Maya and Mexican Tradition. Quote, before the arrival of the first Spaniards in Mexico over 400 years ago, and probably much earlier, in fact, I think I'm going to underline that for emphasis. The Mexicans told of certain stars called Zontamoc, or falling hairs, which fell from heaven to earth with the Lord of the Dead. Their fall was commemorated annually in the Cajole festival, said to have been held towards the end of October. This festival and the falling of the stars was associated with the end of the world. The Lord of the Dead governed the festival of the dead preceding the Cajole, during which the spirits of the dead were supposed to return to earth from the land of souls in the sky. No doubt they were believed to have been accompanied by their deity, whose fall is mentioned in the ritual. On sheet 8 of the Mexican Vaticanus 3773, And in the Borgian and other codices, these stars of the falling hairs are depicted falling from the sky to the earth, accompanied by many other stars, further identified by the conventional stars beside them. So here's an example of Xantamach, the fallen god. Note the rattlesnake glyph in the lower right-hand corner. To the Mexicans, the ancient Mexicans, the rattlesnake glyph was a symbol for the Pleiades. Now, let's consider what we've got here. Notice the Lord of the Dead. He's falling to earth, and he's accompanied by other falling stars. So I think right here now we've already begun to see very explicitly what this is leading us towards. Now, the rattlesnake, what is one of the characteristics of the rattlesnake? They can bite you, they can inject you with poison, they can kill you. But they usually give you warning, don't they? Yeah. The Vaticanus Codex antedates the entrance of the first Spaniards into Mexico and depicts traditions much older than that date. From these facts, it seems reasonably certain that the Xantamach were November meteors, whose falling hair referred to the fiery trails left behind them. But the Mexicans seem to have distinguished between the different meteor groups, for they refer to the fall of a Xantamach on the day one eagle, which pertains to Taurus, and would seem, therefore, to refer to Taurid meteors. The end of the world would naturally be associated with the memory of one of the great meteoric showers during November, when all the stars seem to fall from the sky. Hagar continued, at Acansa, in the Yucatan, a Maya zodiac was placed on the stucco facade of a mound, probably long prior to the coming of the Spaniards. It was probably at least 600 years old when it was exhumed. On this zodiac, which represents the signs in regular sequence, the position of Taurus is occupied by two panels, the lower of which represents the rattle of a snake. It is Tzabek, the rattle asterism, our Pleiades. The upper panel contains a down-flying, semi-human or ape-like figure. Beside his tail are star symbols, and above his head spears or arrows, implements of war, which in the Cajoli festival represent the end of the world, marked by the fall of the Xantamach. This Maya figure also probably refers to a Taurid meteor emanating from Taurus in November, when that asterism is near the meridian. And so here we see from that stucco facade, we see the diving monkey figure on the stucco relief. Here's the rattlesnake glyph. Up here, this is interesting because associated with this God falling to earth, this is the great urn being overturned and pouring out the waters of the flood onto the earth. And here is a Christian depiction of the same ideal, but in this case it's Lucifer, bound and falling. This is in Roslyn Chapel. And this opens up some other completely alternate meanings for the identity of Lucifer. Many depictions on cathedrals, medieval cathedrals, have diving figures. The skydiver from Autun Cathedral. Here we have from the Dresden Codex a torch-bearing dog or beast beneath a celestial dragon strip. Two torches, one pointing down towards the earth, flaming torches, I should point out. One, the flaming torch is directed towards the earth, the other it's directed towards the sky. And here we have ancient Roman traditions, Mithraeus, from the Mithraic traditions, and these were the two torchbearers that were seen to accompany the god Mithras, and they always held each a torch, one pointed up towards the sky, the other one pointed down towards the earth. So let's talk a little bit about the Taurid meteor stream. We won't go into a lot of this. We'll skip over some of this. These are accounts of encounters with the Taurid meteor stream. I'll start with some work by astronomer Fred Whipple, published in 1948. It was the first photographic meteor studies, and this was, he focused on the Taurid shower. This was published in the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society, 1940. The present paper is a study of 14 meteors photographed at the northern stations of the Harvard Observatory. 13 photographed in 1937 and one in 1938. The meteors all belong to or are associated with the Taurid shower. The total interval of the shower, as covered by the present observations, is from October 26th to November 22nd, nearly a month. Now, this is because the stream itself is very diffuse, which is a characteristic of old meteor streams because stuff gets spread out. But still, it peaks those 3 days, late October and early November. But for the Earth to entirely cross the whole stream, it goes all the way up to the 22nd of November. This unusual persistence of the Taurid shower, coupled with the slow daily motion of the radiant, has led Knopf and Hofmeister to conclude that the shower orbits are hyperbolic about the sun. But the present observations show that the orbits are closed and of short period. There have previously been few data concerning the variation of meteor orbits with position within a stream. Because the Taurid shower provides such data, the observations are discussed in some detail and the stream identified in origin with Encke's comet. Now, here's the significance of what Whipple discovered. Was he essentially took photographic studies of these meteors as they're moving forward through their orbits, which, as he says here, the original view was that they were hyperbolic. Now, hyperbolic means that it's open-ended. So if it's open-ended, that means meteors are coming in, going out, and they're not returning. The significance of Whipple's work showed, as he says here, let me go forward to this one. As he says here, the present observations show that the orbits are closed and of short period. In other words, they're not hyperbolic, they're elliptical. So elliptical means short period, they're going to be coming back regularly. And in fact, it works out to be about a little bit more than 3 years. Now, what he did was once you take these photographs, the meteors are tracing out the geometric path of the ellipse. So you can now take these 14 meteors, and if you have enough positions as they're moving forward in the sky, you can now play it in reverse, right? Each meteor is within this stream but has a slightly distinct orbit from the other meteors. But when you play them in reverse, what happens is those meteors all converge on the same point in space, which tells you that they're fragmentations of an object that was once a single object. Further, if you trace that back, it converges on the same point in space occupied by Comet Encke, which tells you, oh, this was byproduct of the disintegration of a disintegration event involving Comet Encke. Let's look at the next graphic here. This shows a radiant point in space. There's two things to appreciate here. The meteors are actually coming in parallel lines like you see in the graphic below. But when you look at them from our perspective, you don't see parallel lines. They all seem to be emanating from a point. Just think about, you've ever walked down a railroad track or anything where you've had that kind of perspective, or a downtown street where the buildings seem to be converging in the distance, you know that they're not really converging, they're parallel. The perspective, the convergence is an illusion of perspective. And so you can imagine almost like when the Earth is passing through a meteor stream, it's almost like the planet is passing through a tunnel. And the meteors, which ultimately emanated from the disintegration of some parent or progenitor comet, are flying along in more or less parallel lines. We're passing through, and as we look upstream, what we see is this radiant point, the point from which the meteors appear to be emanating in space. The meteors of the Taurid stream are not actually coming from the Pleiades. It's an illusion of perspective. But it's a very natural way to associate that point in space where the meteors appear to be emanating with the particular star groupings that fall, that are in line with that point. Does that make sense? Good. Okay. And here's an actual time-lapse photograph of the Leonid meteor shower looking towards the radiant. And so you can see here, if you were to take these meteors and draw them back, you would see that they all converge on this point here that's very close to the star Regulus, which is in the constellation of Leo. And this event peaks on November 17th. So here we have, so here we have a graphic. And this graphic shows the orbit of two Taurid meteors. Now, these two particular meteors sort of lie on the outside range of the stream. They're like near the shoreline of the stream. So what you can get by tracking the orbits of these two Taurid meteors is more or less the region in space that's occupied by the stream. So if we look at this graphic, you'll notice here the sun at the center, and then you'll see Mercury, and you'll see the Earth right here, and then you'll see, that's Venus. Here's Mercury, the inner circle, then Venus, then the Earth, and then we have Mars. And so what you can see here with the meteor stream is that the meteors are moving this way, the way of the arrows. So the arrows are showing the orbits of the planets in that direction. It's like as if we're looking from above down on the solar system. The Taurid stream is also moving more or less in the same direction. Now you see these lines here extending from its most distal point from its orbit around the sun, which is called the aphelion, and its closest point called the perihelion. And you can see that the meteors would be coming in this way, past perihelion right here, and then continue back out like this, almost to the orbit of Jupiter, and then they begin to fall back, towards the sun, and they're doing this about every 3 to 3.5 years, right in here. So now let's go to the next slide, and I've kind of shown some more additional detail. So here's Earth's orbit. Now what you can see from this is Earth is crossing the stream twice, right? One time as it's coming from around the sun, and again as it's coming in towards the sun. So at this point, at this crossing, the meteors are going to be difficult to see. The reason? Well, because they're coming from the direction of the sun. So you'd almost have to be looking into the sun to see them, right? Now, this happens June 30th. Now, before we come around, do you know a significant event that happened on June 30th? You've heard of Tunguska. A meteorite came in and blew up in the Siberian atmosphere about 5 miles above the ground. And it happened on June 30th. And guess what? The direction it came from? Well, it was not seen until the last minute because it appeared to be coming directly from the sun. And in fact, some of the eyewitnesses who first saw it commented things like, said it looked like it was being born out of the sun or disgorged from the sun. So the Tunguska event of 1908 that blew up in the Siberian atmosphere 5 miles above the ground with the force of a 15 to 20 megaton hydrogen bomb utterly devastated about 820 square miles of old-growth taiga forest, completely scorched and incinerated about 200 square miles of that same forest directly under the epicenter, left scars that were still there 20 years later that were finally discovered and investigated by scientists. Given the timing and the placement, both being consistent with that object being a member of the torrid stream. In other words, the summertime torrids were at the peak of the summertime torrids, crossing that stream, and it's coming directly out of the sky from that point in space where the stream would be emanating. Now, we come on around, Earth is moving this way through its orbit. This is in June, so now you're going through the summer, you come around, you're into the fall, and here we are at November 1st. And now, if you happen to look up the stream on that day, you're looking in the direction of this green arrow directly towards the Pleiades. You begin to get to see the geometry here of how this works. So now we get to the work of Victor Klube and Bill Napier, The Cosmic Winter, published in 1990. As noted, very few comets present any danger to the Earth, but the occasional giant comet that is trapped in an Earth-crossing orbit of short period rapidly develops in such a manner as to intermittently generate a substantial swarm of bodies, which are commonly asteroidal. The giant comets recur at intervals of about 100,000 years during a shower, whilst the terrestrial encounters with the asteroidal swarms, which may continue for a century or two, recur at intervals of about a millennium. Between the 3rd and 15th of November each year, the Earth runs through a meteor stream coming from a small area in the constellation of Taurus the Bull. A young stream made up of meteors not long released from their parent comet would be narrow and probably strong, and the Earth would pass through it in half a day or so. The Geminid meteor stream is one such, the Earth encountering it on the 10th of December each year and the shower being over by the 12th of December. The Taurid meteor stream, on the other hand, takes the Earth 12 days to cross, and it is not very intense. It looks old. It has two main branches, northern and southern, emerging from slightly different parts of the constellations, the branches being about equal intensity. Orbiting with the Taurid meteor stream is a small comet, discovered in 1818 by Pons. An orbit was calculated for this comet by Johann Encke, a pupil of the famous mathematician Gauss, who had developed a method for calculating the orbits of bodies from their movement across the sky. There are about 100 known short periods of comets. All of these, with the sole exception of Encke's comet, are in orbits which sooner or later lead to a close encounter with Jupiter and ejection from the solar system by the powerful gravitational pull of that planet. But Encke's comet has somehow established itself in a stable orbit, such that it never comes within the Jovian sphere of influence. It does, however, come close to Earth. In addition, there may be 1,000 or 2,000 asteroids over a kilometer across in orbits which make them a potential collision hazard with the Earth. None is more than about 10 kilometers across, their surfaces extremely dark, and fewer than 50 have been discovered. They are known as Apollo asteroids, after the prototype discovered in 1932. Encke's comet is, in fact, the sole example of an active comet in an Apollo orbit. The orbit is highly elongated, and the comet may approach to within 0.34 astronomical units of the Sun, and go out to 4.1 astronomical units. The comet's orbit is inclined at only 12 degrees to that of the Earth's. This low inclination and the shortness of the orbital period ensure that there is frequent interaction between the Earth and the material of the Taurid stream. and the potential for occasional, very close encounters with Encke's comet. On the face of it, then, the Taurids seem to be an elderly, diffuse meteor stream with no peculiar characteristics other than their association with a comet in an unusual orbit and just too faint to be seen with the naked eye. There is much more to the Taurid stream, however, than this. In a study of fireball records from the 1st to the 15th centuries A.D., the astronomers Astapovich and Taranteva found that the fireball flux from the Taurids was much more intense 1,000 years ago. The Soviet astronomers found the Taurids were the most powerful shower of the year in the 11th century, with 42 fireballs belonging to them, and no shower, not even the great ones, could be compared with them as to activity. In the not-too-distant past, therefore, the Taurids were revealing themselves as outstanding performers in the night sky. Two recent discoveries confirm the suspicion that the stream is a remarkable one. The first of these is that amongst the 80 or so known Apollos, 6 or 7 are orbiting within the Taurid meteor stream. There are some interesting objects. Hephaestus, for example, is the largest known Apollo asteroid, being about 10 kilometers in diameter. Its orbit closely resembles that of the comets. Then there is Old Giotto, a dark asteroid about 1.5 kilometers across. Now, it is very unlikely that these bodies are the only ones orbiting within the Taurid meteors. Discovery of the Apollo asteroids as a whole is only about 5% complete. We are therefore led to the remarkable conclusion that there are between 1 and 200 asteroids of more than a kilometer diameter orbiting within the Taurid meteor stream. It seems clear that we are looking at debris from the breakup of an extremely large object. From Meteorite Falls in June, 2 sets of observations which appeared in the Journal of Geophysical Research in 1996, and this is from the abstract. 2 types of meteoritic events are associated with the calendric period June 13th through 30th. One is an excess of falls of certain basaltic meteors. These comprise a new subgrouping of achondrites, whose lithologies suggest possibly similar pre-terrestrial histories. Historical high-energy impact-like events on the Earth and the Moon have also occurred in late June. In addition to the much-studied events in 1178, 1908, the Tunguska event, and 1975, these include an impact-like lunar event known to Islamic scholars, whose occurrence in 617 A.D. may have been June 26th or 27th. So, is this starting to make sense? You see how these, yeah. So we have the evidence. I'm going to stop share for a minute. But we're seeing now, I'm trying to show you 2 parallel lines of knowledge. One, coming from these traditions from all over the world, this idea of the Day of the Dead and association of that day with the peaking of the Pleiades at midnight. Well, obviously, if in times past you're going to see the most spectacular light show associated with that particular meteor stream, it's going to be at night, at midnight, when it's prominently up in the sky. And what we're seeing here, and the idea goes back, if this stream is actually very old, which it appears to be ultimately from an object which entered the inner solar system maybe as long as 25,000 years ago, and then began to undergo this hierarchy of disintegration events. And one of these byproducts of one of these disintegration events is Comet Encke. So anyways, now we have an astronomical tradition associated showing that this Taurid stream is possibly very, very significant in historical terms. And we already know that it's almost certainly the origin of the Tunguska event of 1908, which, was only 150 or so feet in diameter. Well, now we have learned that from these astronomical studies that there may be 100 or 150 objects that are a kilometer in diameter. Do you know what a kilometer in diameter, how many Tunguskas that could yield? Let's see. So a kilometer is 3,280 feet. So if I divide that by 2 to get the radius, that's 1,640. Now if I cube that and time it 1.3333, I get 588,111. 588,111,163. So I get, so I've just converted that into cubic feet, and it's basically 588 million cubic feet. Now I'm going to divide that by the Tunguska, which is about 75 feet in diameter, times 1.333 equals that. I should have put that in memory. So let's see, I'll go 75 feet, y to the x 3, times 1.333 equals this, divide by 588,111,163. And so that means that an object a kilometer in diameter could produce over 1,000 Tunguska-type objects if it fragmented. I'm going to double-check that calculation, but it certainly does give you an idea that 1,000, that would be like 1,000 hydrogen bombs going off, and that would be globally devastating. Would not cause a mass extinction of humans. It could cause certainly regional, if not hemispheric, mass extinctions. The most likely means of human salvation would be if we could temporarily get off the planet for a while until the dust settled and then come back again. Okay, and this is from Wikipedia. The Taurids are an annual meteor shower associated with the comet Encke. They are named after the constellation Taurus, where they are seen to come from the sky. Because of their occurrence in late October and early November, they are also called Halloween fireballs. Encke and the Taurids are believed to be remnants of a much larger comet, which has disintegrated over the past 20 to 30,000 years, breaking into several pieces and releasing material by normal cometary activity or perhaps occasionally by close encounters with the gravitational field of Earth or other planets. In total, this stream of matter is the largest in the inner solar system. Due to the stream's size, the Earth takes several weeks to pass through it, causing an extended period of meteor activity compared with the much smaller periods of activity in other showers. And let's see here. So I'm going to go back to the share screen. I go down here and show you another. Go through all the Tunguska material, which could be a whole separate treatment in and of itself, actually. And that's something we could perhaps talk about. Okay, so here you see various Earth-approaching comets. This is me standing looking south. Sun is coming up on June 30th, coming up in the east. And then you see the Beta Taurids right there. Z is the position in the space from which the Tunguska object appeared to strike the Earth's atmosphere. So you can see it's very close, actually, to the very point in space that would make it, consistent with a Taurid meteor. So let's go on here. For some reason, when I transferred to this was originally in a Hebrew font, so I've got to go back and correct that. So here we have the Mithraic tradition. Now, we've got Mithras here. He's accompanied by 7 stars. Those 7 stars traditionally represent the Pleiades. You'll notice what he's doing. He's turning and he's looking back towards the sun god, but what he's really looking at is the raven, or in some cases an eagle, who is considered to be the messenger of the gods. There are 2 torchbearers. There was a reconstruction of this that was done, and it was mistaken because one of the torchbearers was supposed to be holding his torch pointing towards the sky and one towards the ground. But notice what Mithras is doing. He's stabbing the bull in his shoulder, and blood, fluid, but presumably blood, is flowing forth from the shoulder. Now, there's a whole lot going on in this bas-relief here, way beyond what we would talk about in this context. But here's Europa being abducted by Zeus in the form of a white bull. You notice the torchbearer here also. Note Mithraic elements. This is from a wall painting found in Rome. The important thing here, notice she's about to stab the bull in the shoulder, Europa. Here is a chariot with steeds. This represents Phaeton's chariot. Do you remember the myth of Phaeton? Phaeton was the son of Helios. Okay, so what you need to do, and you can do this on your own. This is a homework assignment. Look up the myth of Phaeton, Phaeton. And Bullfinch's mythology has a real good account of Phaeton. But very briefly, Phaeton was the son of Helios, the sun god, and he was able to persuade his father to let him drive the chariot of the sun. But the chariot of the sun, he was not able to control it because of the power of the great steeds pulling it, and they veered off the road, which was the pathway of the sun, through the signs of the zodiac along the ecliptic, and the chariot began to descend to earth, and it set the earth on fire. So in this particular painting, they're showing the Phaeton chariot. He's holding something in his hand here, which I interpret to be the bolide. And then down here, what's happening here? You got Poseidon. He's overturning the urn, and the waters of the great flood are spilling out on the earth. So in this particular painting, each of these events is being associated. The abduction of Europa, the stabbing of the bull in the shoulder, the torchbearer, the Phaeton myth, and then the Great Deluge. So then, a quote from Sir Henry Howarth, 1887, The Mammoth and the Flood. The Peruvians had several flood stories. One of them refers to a flood accompanied by an eclipse of the sun lasting 5 days. All living things were destroyed except a shepherd and his family, etc. Some time before he had noticed that his flock of llamas looked sad and seemed to be studying the stars. On inquiring from them, they pointed to 6 stars close together and declared that they were a sign that the world would shortly be destroyed by a deluge. He thereupon collected his llamas and his children and took them to the summit of the mountain Ancasmarca, to where a crowd of other animals had already sought safety. Scarcely had they reached the summit when the sea broke its bounds and rushed over the land. The Eve of the Deluge. This painting is very interesting, and it makes some wonder about some of these artists and where they got their inspiration from. This is the Eve of the Deluge, of course, the Great Flood, right? And these are the antediluvian patriarchs here. Reclining back is Methuselah, and one of the patriarchs, probably Enoch, is pointing to the omen in the sky, which is the great comet. And that the appearance of this great comet in the sky is indicative of the impending flood that's about to destroy the world. And then I get a little bit into this, which is kind of a segue off the Burkle Crater event. Then let's see. Okay, let's look at that. So we'll skip through what I think is the most likely explanation for Noah's flood. Isaac Asimov in 1979 speculating a meteor might have caused the flood. Geological confirmation, George Friedrich Wright, geological confirmation of the Noachian deluge. And this thing, the Assyrian clay tablet discovered by Sir Austin Henry Layard in 1858 in Iraq, believed to be a 700 BC copy of an older Sumerian astronomical text from several thousand years BC. And here's that appeared in the UK Telegraph March 31st, 2008 by their science correspondent. Clay tablet holds clue to asteroid mystery. British scientists have deciphered a mysterious ancient clay tablet and believe they have solved a riddle over a giant asteroid impact more than 5,000 years ago. Now researchers say their translation of symbols on a star map from an ancient civilization includes notes on a mile-wide asteroid that later hit Earth, which could have caused tens of thousands of deaths. The circular clay tablet was discovered 150 years ago by Sir Austin Henry Layard, a leading Victorian archaeologist, in the remains of the royal palace at Nineveh, the capital of ancient Assyria, what is now Iraq. The tablet, on display at the British Museum, shows drawings of constellations and pictogram-based text known as cuneiform, used by Sumerians, the earliest civilization in the world. Now, Alan Bond, the managing director of a space propulsion company, Reaction Engines, and Mark Hempsell, a senior lecturer in astronautics at Bristol University, have cracked the cuneiform code and used a computer program that can reconstruct the night sky thousands of years ago to provide a new explanation. They believe their calculations prove the tablet, a copy made by an Assyrian scribe around 700 BC, is a Sumerian astronomer's notebook recording events in the sky on June 29th, 3123 BC, which would, of course, put it right in the time slot of the Taurids. And then Arabic traditions concerning the Great Flood. Surid, one of the kings of Egypt before the flood, built 2 great pyramids. The reason, this is from Masudi, the Field of Gold Mines and Gems, written around 930 AD. The reason for building the pyramids was that the king, who lived 300 years before the flood, once dreamt that the earth was twisted around, the stars fell from the sky and clashed together with a great noise, and that all mankind took refuge in terror. The king Masudi then relates, summoned his interpreters of dreams. The best of them reported that he had had a parallel dream about a year earlier and was told in it that after the disaster, the firmament would return to its former site. Upon being told that afterwards Egypt would flourish again, the king ordered the pyramids to be built. According to Masudi, they were filled with the knowledge of the secret sciences, everything known of mathematics, astronomy, and geometry, and other wonders and treasures, which is a bit of an interesting aside. So let's get back to Halloween and wrap it up here. So here is a Chinese document, Record of the World's Change. Was written between 602 and 667 AD. It was quoted in the book Comets by Sagan, and Durian. Comets are vile stars. Every time they appear in the south, something happens to wipe out the old and establish the new. Let's go down here and you can see that. We're zooming through all of this. Here we go. A comet has a long tail and is thus commonly called a broom star. The ancients believed it was a symbol of war and calamity. Their appearances heralded wars and disasters for humankind, and ancient people were afraid of seeing them. People who bring misfortune or bad luck may also be called broom stars. So you can see people here taking refuge from the broom star that appears in the sky. 612, this was one of the first comets reported in more than one Chinese historical text. Let's see, the text said a broom star entered the Big Dipper sometime during the month of 612, August 4th to September 2nd. The ch'un, however it's pronounced. Then as a broom sweeps away what is old to give place to something new, a comet is supposed to presage changes. So this idea of the comet as a broom star is seen in this drawing from Theatricum Cometicum 1666 by Stanislaw Lubianiki. The broom star sweeping away the old. Now notice as the broom star passes overhead in the sky, it leaves dark, turbulent weather behind with lightning bolts coming down, the destruction of buildings and the outbreak of great fires. So there's Comet West, and impressive. You can see how people could have likened a comet in the sky to a broom. So here's a witch-like cometary apparition destroying the earth. And there's a traditional witch flying in front of the moon. And then here's the quote that we opened with. If you put your clothes on inside out and walk backwards outside on Halloween night, you will see a witch flying in the sky at midnight. Now think about this. What have we just learned? If you go outside at midnight on Halloween, whether you're walking backwards or not, the witch in the sky will be the Pleiades with the Taurid meteor stream. That's what you'll see. So then again, here's the radiant of the Taurid meteor stream, the Pleiades right there, and this would be Halloween night. And then another depiction of Mithras. And here's the radiant of the Taurid meteor stream superimposed on the bull. I go back to this because, again, the bull is being stabbed in the shoulder, which traditionally is exactly where the Pleiades are. And then as a consequence of that stabbing in the shoulder, we have the blood of the bull pouring forth and pouring down to the earth. Apparition, a ghostly appearance, a specter or phantom, anything that appears, especially something remarkable or phenomenal. And so we talk about an apparition in terms of ghosts, but maybe another one of these peculiar little coincidences that we refer to the appearance of a comet in the sky also as an apparition. And that may go back to a correlation in the minds of our ancestors that there was this correlation between the ideas of ghosts on Earth and the appearance of spectral phenomena in the sky. And clearly the close passage of a comet could actually be something very disconcerting. And I did a little graphic here of Halley's Comet. And just to kind of give to emphasize the ghost-like possible association that people could see the passage of a comet in the sky and think ghosts. Here's the spring equinox circa 3300 BC in the age of Taurus, right? We looked at that earlier. And there's the radiant of the Taurid meteor shower. And there's your typical skull and crossbones. And I want you to notice the angle of the plane of the ecliptic intersection with the celestial equator with the angle of the crossed bones. And this is an artist's depiction of a asteroid that was discovered a number of years ago, and I looked at it and I thought, it reminds me of something. I wasn't quite sure what. And then some kid said, well, it looks like, who was this guy? Was this you've probably seen it. What is this? Who was this character? It's Jason. It's not Freddy. It's Jason. Right. Archetypal imagery endures so that we might remember that which must not be forgotten. Because remember what Merlin said, it is the doom of men that they forget. So, there we go. I think what we've shown here is the possibility that there's a much deeper meaning to Halloween than that guy who I was quoting from the beginning, who seemed to disavow any meaning at all to Halloween. Thank you for joining me on this episode of After School. If you find this story intriguing and want to learn more, you can find a wealth of similar material at my website, randallcarlson.com, or through my podcast, cosmographia.com. The extended version of this Festival of the Dead story, with additional critical details that brings this compelling account full circle, will be presented in an exclusive live stream event this Halloween and will be subsequently available in perpetuity for anyone who is interested. Please check my website or howtube.com for further details and information how you can participate in this unique event. Also, if you are interested in learning more about our one-of-a-kind tours to very special places, we have one upcoming this end of this March. You can find out more information by visiting randallcarlson.com. Thank you for joining us on this special after-school episode to learn more about this fascinating and forgotten history of Halloween. Thank you.